Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO and I have a confession to make. Back before I became a CMO, I worked at an institution that was trying to implement a project management process across our division. And I was a complete jerk about it. I felt like the project management process was micromanaging and it wasn't something that felt like I had any autonomy and any ability to make decisions. And I was so wrong. And thank God I figured that out before I went to my next institution as a CMO. And the work that we did that was so creative and innovative in that role, honestly, a big part of it was because we had such a strong foundation in our workflows and in how we operated. This is something I hear so many institutions talk about having challenges with. So I'm really excited to have Joanne Giles on the show to talk about how to implement workflows that help your organization be more effective. Joanne is the founder and principal consultant of All Things Content. I loved this conversation with Joanne, and I hope you do as well. Enjoy the show.
The really deep operating issue that could be causing the most challenging friction could come from someone who doesn't really speak up that much. So that's why the data is the most important thing. Start with like projects that have already completed, like a campaign you guys already did from start to finish, and look at that information. That's a great starting point.
You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt, your source for insight and inspiration on the issues shaping higher ed marketing. From AI and branding to enrollment strategy and leadership, each episode explores the ideas, challenges, and opportunities facing today's marketing leaders. Let's get into it. Hey, Joanne, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jaime. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited about this conversation because one of the things I get asked about the most is how do I expand the capacity of my team? Or it's probably the second most common question I get is like, my workflows are broken. What do I do about it? So I want to just jump right in with when a higher ed marketing or communications team says we don't have enough capacity, what might be happening underneath that?
I hear that often and frame that way as well. A lot of the time, capacity is real, but it's not the whole story. And what I mean by that is what I see often is that teams are calling something a capacity issue when really there's a deeper problem, which is an operating model issue. And what that looks like is requests are coming in from too many places. One, priorities are shifting without really a clear decision rule. Approvals are unclear. Essentially, work is living across inboxes, team chats, spreadsheets, project management tools, if there's one implemented. So the team is spending a huge amount of energy just figuring out what's happening, what's next, and who owns what. And I think that's the type of friction that really eats at capacity. So, yes, a team may need more people, but before you can add more people, you really need to understand whether the existing team has a clear way for work to move. Otherwise, you just add capacity into that same broken system. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
sometimes the capacity issue is real, definitely, but the capacity loss is coming from an unclear workflow.
I absolutely 100% agree with you on that answer. And I think about somebody I just talked to a friend of mine who said that
Mhm.
their team, their division, which I think has about 35 people,
Mhm.
has 4 different project management systems. They
Oh my
have
goodness.
all of these and they don't communicate with each other, and there isn't an integrated planning process
Mhm.
across that team. So they're
Mhm.
not, say, maybe the marketing team and the PR team are not working in sync. So they're not
Mhm.
leveraging all the things that come out of that. And I talk a lot about the time in my career where I was a director of web strategy, and it felt like we were always the caboose. Like people would work on projects, and then it
Mhm.
would be like, oh, shoot, we need a website for this. Jaime, we
Yep.
need a website in 2 days. And the capacity issue was really, we didn't see this project coming.
Yep. The
And
fire
suddenly we
drills.
have to rush and have, our whole team drop everything to work on this.
Mhm.
And it wasn't that we didn't have capacity, it was that it wasn't planned well. And
Yeah.
I'm really curious. So when you are in those situations, when you talk to someone who's like, my team is completely overwhelmed, everything is chaotic, how do you start figuring out where the real bottleneck actually is?
Mm. I would say when you are diving deep and trying to figure out the real bottleneck, I first would start off with existing projects, like real project work. Don't think about it in the abstract. Like, for example, somebody who's listening to this episode might get some really great takeaways and be like, okay, I can build a workflow for my team. No, you want to start with current state. You want to start with your actual information. So, if your team is feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling overwhelmed right now, start small, but start with like the real work. So, I would say take 5 to 10 recent projects that happened, like it's closed, we've closed them out, right? And I would focus on these questions. How did this request enter the team? Where did it come from? Where did it originate? Did we have the right information at the start? And then also, where did it slow down? That's really going to give you some good insight, like the process or the flow of the work moving. Um, and then also who had to approve it, because that's also a really big bottleneck areas in the approval, the approval part. Did we know who owned each stage or like the next step? That also slows down work too and creates bottlenecks. And then also, could leadership see status without asking? Because having to constantly be like, where's this? Where's this? And then you have to go hunt and like reach out to 50 people to figure out where this one thing is. That is a massive bottleneck in it of itself as well. So I think this will give you a practical diagnostic. And then before you try to fix the whole system, just choose one area to fix first, right? So don't try to rebuild the whole department in like a week. If intake is the issue, then focus on defining what ready means. If approvals, for example, is the issue, then like create an approval map, like a decision map, like who's supposed to approve at this stage, et cetera, who has final approval. If handoffs are the issue, so like moving when the work moves from one team to another, like you mentioned, you know, for websites, people randomly like, oh, wait, we need a website. Let's reach out to the website team, like too far down the process. You need to define ownership on those handoffs, like who owns making sure that the required information for the next team or the executing team is met before that team has to start. And that also includes their turnaround time and the expectations for the window of how long it takes for them to do the work. All of that comes into play. And then, like, if visibility is an issue, then you need to standardize statuses. Like, where's our single source of truth? Where can we see all the things? Another thing I would say with overwhelm too, because a lot of the times Marcom leaders are overwhelmed because some of their team members are coming to them with, obviously friction that's happening, etc. And I would caution you to not lead with like the loudest complaint, because that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the friction point is. That's just like a personality trait. That's a person who just expresses themselves the most. But the really deep operating issue that could be causing the most challenging friction could come from someone who doesn't really speak up that much. So that's why the data is the most important thing. Start with like projects that have already completed, like a campaign you guys already did from start to finish, and look at that information. That's a great starting point.
Every word you said, I was like, I have a follow-up question for that. I have a follow-up comment on that.
I
One of
love that.
one of the things that you mentioned though that I really want to put like a +1 on
Hmm.
really strongly for the folks who are listening who maybe aren't a VP or a chief marketing officer, the question around leadership asking for status updates. I really want to stress that I felt like this, and team members that have worked for me have felt like this, and friends have felt like this, that when a leader asks you for a status update on a project, that is signaling a lack of trust. And I don't see it that way at all anymore, having been a VP. To me, it's more about there isn't a place to go to look for that answer.
Hmm.
And I can't sit in a meeting where somebody says, what's the status? Or, do you know what's going on with this? And say, I don't know.
Mhm.
If there's a system, if there's something where I can quickly go in and look and see, oh, it looks like that's moving through approvals with my internal review right now, but it's moving on to your team. It's scheduled to
Mhm.
move to your team by the end of the week. I don't have to ask those questions. And
Mhm.
I was really resisted to a project management approach in my last job before I was a CMO. It's so embarrassing to say that. But when it got implemented, I was like, oh, Danny never has to ask me the
Yes.
status of anything anymore. And the project management person for our division trained him like, I need you to check first and not ask people first because we're trying to
Yes.
show the value of this system to people. So
Mhm.
go in and look. So, because otherwise they're going to be annoyed that they're putting something into the system and then you're not using that. Like, as a leader, you need to be using it. And as a team member, you need to understand why it's important to keep that up to date.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to co-sign everything you just said. Spot on. I've heard the same, especially with the status update and kind of this concept of creating bureaucracy around like process. I've heard all of that and how the project management tool can be something that's hard to implement as well. But when people are able to see that the tool actually helps create less friction by allowing leaders to present the team in the best light possible, by being able in the meeting to just pull up and be like, this is where we're at with that, is approval sitting here, et cetera, et cetera. That creates a lot of relief for the team. So I think that's one of the things that when I frame the importance of having some type of source of truth, and not just source of truth, but reinforcing the shared visibility piece, I think that's what really brings down the barriers that people have up, or the walls that they have up, when they're thinking that someone's just thinks they're not doing their job because they're asking for an update on where things are at the time. Yeah, I
Oh,
love everything you just
right.
said.
I wish we lived closer to each other. Um, a lot of teams try to solve these problems by adopting
Mhm,
a project management tool.
mhm.
Many teams. Um, why doesn't that work on its own? Like, what?
Mm,
A lot of teams are like, hey, we have a process problem. Let's go buy Asana.
yeah,
Why doesn't just
I
buying a
see it
piece
all
of
the time.
software, or nowadays we're buying subscriptions, why doesn't that just solve all the problems?
Yeah, I love that you asked this question because it's so important to make this distinction right here. So, a project management tool can reinforce clarity, right? It's a tool, but it cannot create the clarity by itself. Like, it just can't. So, what I mean by that is if you don't already know how work should enter the system, who owns each step, like we've been talking about, how approvals happen, what ready means, when work moves from like one stage to the next, then the tool is just going to document the confusion that already exists
Right.
in the division. It's not going to actually solve anything. So that's why, teams can buy Asana, right? Hive, ClickUp, Monday, whatever tool, and still feel super overwhelmed. And the issue isn't always the platform, it's the operating rules were never defined. So I would say before you get a tool, or before a tool can actually really help, you need like these key categories when you're thinking about the success from an adoption standpoint, and also like making the tool work the way you need it to work for how your division works. You need to think about your intake standards. Like, what are those? Workflow stages, ownership rules. That's a big one. Approval paths, status definitions.
Yeah.
And then also like a rhythm for reviewing and updating work as well too, to maintain that consistency. So essentially the tool should support the workflow, not become the workflow. And that's where that's that gap that exists with people who try to fix the underlying operating issue with a tool.
I love this. I was just talking with a client that I'm working on a marketing maturity model. So they're trying to basically figure out where they stand with their department's maturity and how they're going to move toward being even more effective. And we were talking about how when I was at Winston-Salem State, we implemented Reich.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we did was take it was like a 3-ish week pause where we didn't take in any new work. And we tried to wrap up all existing work before that. And
Mhm.
then we spent that time defining how workflows were going to work, semantics, the semantics of how you name files, how you name tasks, how you name
Mhm.
projects. Created a template for how we're going to have all of our project briefs look and what
Mhm.
fields are on them and what are we putting in those fields so that there's consistency across the projects. And then we rolled it out. The intake process was, this is the only way you intake. And if the chancellor calls and says, hey, I need a project, we're not going to make him fill out the intake form, but we will fill it out as an intake form so that it's not coming through via email. All of these things. And I remember my team was like very skeptical that this was going to change their lives. And within like a month and a half, people were like, I know what everything is. I
Mhm.
know nothing's sneaking through via email to you. Like, oh,
Mhm.
what's Jamie going to dump on me? Like, it's going to come through this form. We had structured time where we met twice a week to go through all the intake forms, assign out the projects, file names were clear. People were able to just focus on doing the work, and
Mhm.
the process took care of itself. But
Yes.
that pause really was essential. Like, we really needed to spend the time. In another role, we had the same project management tool. It was
Mhm.
already implemented, and I'm putting implemented in air quotes because
Yes.
that's not the word I would use. But it was already implemented, and it was completely chaotic. There was no process. Designers were getting projects they'd never heard about. Web team was like, what is this? It was complete chaos. And
Mhm.
so and then what you see, or I've seen, I'm curious if you've seen it, is people are like, I'm going to move to a different project management system because this one doesn't work for me. Do you hear
Yes.
that a lot?
All the time. I hear it all the time. I think there's a few things, there are a lot of signs, right? Where that can let you know that a tool hasn't really been implemented properly, meaning that there isn't that workflow alignment. And a lot of the signs you listed, one is that everyone is using the tool differently. Let's just start there. There isn't a consistency in how the tool is being used across teams, across individuals, etc. So like one person, for example, is treating it like a task list, like they're using it for their own to-dos, but for their part of this entire workflow or operating model, right? And then someone else is using it like an asset managers, where they're uploading their files, storing all their versions, etc. Someone else is just like updating it when someone taps them. It's like, hey, did you update it in this tool, right? And then you also always have this person in the group, the one that just avoids the tool completely.
Yes.
They don't even use it.
Yeah.
Another sign I would say too is that leaders are still having to ask, where are we with this? And if
Yeah.
that's still the case, then the tool exists, but it's not doing what it needs to be doing, because if everyone was using it consistently, then the visibility that's needed from an executive level or a leadership level would be there. And so that question wouldn't exist. So that's another sign that, like, I don't think we, in air quotes, implemented
Yeah.
this tool the way we should have. And another one I would say is the duplicate work. I see that all the time. The same project that exists in this tool that's supposed to be creating that shared visibility, providing the tracking that we need, all of that. That project is still living in someone's spreadsheet somewhere where the actual updates are really happening, or it's in this like email thread. Or what everyone talks about, the team channels, like
Yes.
the huge
Yes.
the huge thread there. That's another sign that the tool was not implemented properly. And it's not the tool
Mm-mm.
that's the issue. You didn't take the pause, like you mentioned earlier, to do what I like to call the under the hood or like unsexy work
Yeah.
of, defining these workflow stages, being able to have a file structure, and then also documenting processes like when I need to do this thing, what are the steps I need to take? And so that can easily be handed off to new people who come and join the teams. You're not like starting from scratch every single time.
There were people on my team at first at every place that I've been, and you
Mhm.
mentioned it, who are
Mhm.
super resistant to a
Mhm.
process. They see it as
Mhm.
bureaucracy, they see it as micromanagement.
Mhm.
And how do you handle that resistance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to the fact that people want to be seen, right? So I try to validate the concern first. And so this happens during my workflow discovery stage. That's the pause that you mentioned earlier. And so I hold stakeholder interviews. I speak to all of the team members to really understand where they fit in this larger functioning division, operating model, etc, because good process should reduce friction, not add to it. We don't want to create process for like process sake. So the way that I usually frame it is we're not building process to control people. Definitely not doing that. We're building enough structure so people don't have to keep reinventing the work or chasing approvals or remembering everything manually, like
Mhm.
just keeping everything in their head. And I think framing using the word structure as opposed to process has helped as well too, because who doesn't like a good foundation? Like you want,
Right.
you like a good solid ground. So I think positioning it that way really helped with resistance, but it really does boil down to I think people resist process when they don't see themselves in it.
Mm.
Like that's why stakeholder interviews and current state mapping are so important. When people can say, yes, that is where the handoff breaks, or yes, that's why the approvals are frustrating, they're more likely to buy into the future state operating model or the new design that we put together because they know that their input was included. And so they can see themselves in the vision. Process becomes bureaucracy when it's disconnected from how people actually work.
Yeah. And it feels like bureaucracy is extra steps that aren't necessary for the process. Like,
Mhm.
my husband was recently submitting performance evaluations for his team, and it was like it needs to go up a level, down a level, down a level, up a level, down a level, up a level, up a level, down a level. Like this, all these steps that are basically like somebody just pushing a button to move it in the workflow.
Mhm.
That's that feels bureaucratic versus like this is a stage where somebody actually needs to see this and approve and sign off on this.
Mhm.
And time limiting those approval stages, I think, is incredibly important and life
Mhm.
changing. And when
Yes.
I hear somebody say, like, well, that's been sitting with our provost for 3 weeks, like, why? You need
Why?
to tell them, like, if I don't hear back from you in X number of days, we're going to assume approval. That will light a fire
Yeah.
under them
Yes.
to do things. I'm really curious when you're doing these workflow analyses.
Mhm.
I'm sure you run into people who have built what they feel are incredibly effective systems for themselves. Like this process works for me, Jaime Hunt, and you are not getting me to change. How do you bring those people along?
With my personality, of course. No, I'm just kidding. So I think the key is you have to show them what they're gaining, right? Not just like what they're losing if they end up losing anything in this situation. So people usually have their own systems because they're just trying to survive, right? Like their spreadsheets or the way that they organize their inbox folder, their notebook, whatever it is, it's their way of creating control in a system that doesn't give them visibility. We keep going back to visibility, but it's really the key to
Yeah.
a lot of this. So I don't approach it like, stop doing that. I approach it with curiosity. You have to get curious. I approach it like, what is that system helping you track? And then, most importantly, I would say, what are you afraid will get lost if we
Mm.
move to a shared process? Those two questions are really going to give you what you need to know to create a highly adoptable like dashboard or viewpoint that everyone feels like they have been a part of, and that will allow people to kind of let go of their own system that they've created because you've incorporated that visibility into whatever the future state is of what you've built. So you translate that knowledge into a shared workflow. So the goal isn't really to like rip away people's coping mechanisms. We don't want to do that. The goal is to build a shared operating system that makes those personal workarounds less necessary.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the benefits that we could use to sell this to people. And from my perspective, one of them is resource planning. So if
Mhm.
I have a shared space where I can see all of your work, that gives me a sense of whether you can take on another project or not, and whether we need to push back on someone and say, you know what, Joanne is at capacity right now, but it looks like in a couple of weeks her time should free up so she can tackle that then. Being more organized, having less chaos, being more proactively planning versus being reactive. But what are some of the other benefits that you can, quote unquote, sell this to resistant people?
Oh, there's so many benefits. I think you listed a lot of them. I think the biggest one is relief. Um, this like weight of constantly having to hunt down information or figure out what the next step is or know what needs to happen in order for you to feel completely at ease with your part being done. That's the biggest benefit because that relief, once you get that relief, you have more time to do the work that you actually love. Like the process is taken care of. You don't have to worry about what the next step is. And that's also where a tool that is aligned with the workflow that you need in your particular division or team comes in as well too, because it handles a lot of this like governance that we're talking about. And a lot there's automations. We love a good automation. Reminders of like, hey, you have this deadline, you need to approve this by this time in order for this to move, etc. All of those things are built into the platform and they create this sense of relief. I like to start my workshops when we talk about like future state. I love to start with this question like, what if the work was actually ready? Like, what if everything was ready? Like, you walked in and like things were ready. You didn't have to like
Yeah.
figure it out. And getting people in that state of mind has really helped to create successful adoption and to really get people to incorporate the language as well within how they run their teams. And that's been the biggest benefit because when people feel relief, people are lighter. That's where the creativity comes out. You're really using your creative muscle. I did this workshop once called like put the fire hose down. So you get to put the fire hose down, no more fire drills because you've already established these processes in place and you could really just like get deep into the work that you love. And that just creates a better environment and a better
Mhm.
culture too.
I had a team member who was resistant a little bit, but her resistance was around, I like the urgency. I like the chaos. And
Mm.
after we implemented the system and everything got really organized and proactive and streamlined, I remember she was like, this is better than the chaos. Like this is I can still find urgency in the work without it being like, I don't know what's going on with this project. Oh my gosh, I dropped the ball on getting a review on this, and the anxiety that comes with that chaos. She could
Hmm.
find that rush of like solving problems in another way that's a
Yes.
lot more productive and healthy and probably healthier for her heart and her, soul. So, there's always those people that thrive on chaos. I thrive in crisis. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean I thrive on crisis because all the processes are nailed down and I can just start working the steps. And
Yeah.
I think that can be, you can thrive in chaos better if there are a flow to that chaos, if you know where that chaos is going. Um, I would love to ask you, what does a successful workflow adoption process look like 6 months after you've done the work?
I love that question. And I also love that you framed it at the 6 month mark because that's very important. You're not going to see, you'll see results in a month, but like you won't really feel it until like 6 months is a great,
Yeah.
a great place to start. Yeah. So successful adoption, I would start off by saying what it's not. It's not people logged into the tool. Like that's not, we didn't successfully adopt because everybody's getting in there and clicking around. 6 months later, what I would like to see is that the work is entering through whatever the agreed intake path is. So that like governed front door that everyone has agreed on. No side, emails or chats or popping into someone's office, etc. Everyone's going through this agreed intake path. Statuses are being updated consistently across all teams, all levels. Approvals are happening in the right place.
Mm.
Um, and leaders can see what's moving without having to like chase updates. That's the 6 month vision. And then also I think a really big indicator that something has is sticking with the team is that the team is using the language of the workflow, right? So you'll hear people say something like, this isn't intake ready yet, or this needs to move through the approval map, or this is a tier one priority because XYZ. Once you start hearing that language, that means that's how you know it's becoming part of how they work. So that's true adoption in my eyes. And then a year later, I would say that's really where you start to see fewer fire drills, very like less confusion around ownership for sure. And then the biggest thing would be a team can onboard new people into the workflow without starting from scratch and feeling very confident about incorporating new people into this existing process. Like that's successful adoption for sure. Adoption is successful when the workflow becomes how the team talks about the work.
I That's so true. I'm curious because there's some change management here, right, for the
Mhm.
team. But
Absolutely.
there's also change management for the folks that intersect with the team.
Mhm.
And I found that people did not like Jamie Hunt at first because they really enjoyed being able to just send an email and that starts a project and they don't have to put any thought into filling out an intake form.
Mhm.
What do you mean you need to know what my strategic goals are for this project? I just want this project. And there was, I remember the an assistant athletic director called and was like, I don't want to do this. I want to just pick up the phone and call Sigrid and tell her what I need. How do you recommend messaging this out to the campus community so
Mhm.
that they understand that we're not doing business the way we used to?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is something that I integrate in my workflow discovery phase as well. So, in the workflow discovery phase, we bring in campus partners. We'll pick key campus partners. Typically, is usually alumni and advancement. Typically, we work with them a lot, or athletics is another big division that we'll work with too. And so we will incorporate them in the workflow discovery process, in the intake process to see where things are breaking on their end too. So they're already integrated in the beginning. So they have some awareness that there's this change that's coming down the pipeline. And then I also recommend after we're done completing the discovery piece, and then we've also developed the future state. So this new process that you're talking about, I always recommend that divisions host a sort of like retreat for their campus partners, and it is positioned as a reintroduction to the campus partners. So it could be like a lunch and learn type thing, where essentially you walk through, here's our new intake process. Here's usually there are some updates that happen on whatever the landing pages that has the intake form. So you will walk through that. We'll explain what the new requirements are, what the steps are, who owns what, all of that. And the way that I have the division present that to campus partners is around the framing that this is going to help us partner with you in a
Mhm.
better way.
Mhm.
This is going to help our working relationship be smoother. Like everyone wins all around. Like frame it around that. Not necessarily we want to make your life harder. We're making all the fields on the intake form required, even if it doesn't make sense. Like, we don't want to position it that way. So I think those are two ways to really um try to avoid as much as possible. You can't avoid it completely. There's always going to be that one person that just resists.
Yeah.
But to try to mitigate that ahead of time is definitely to incorporate campus partners in workflow discovery so that they feel heard too, because they are the ones receiving um whatever structure ends up changing. They're going to feel that. So incorporating them in the beginning and then doing that lunch and learn to reintroduce yourself to campus.
We actually did an open house where we had food and booths set up where
Hmm.
different areas of the department had educational information about like the photography videography team had information about like what makes a successful photo shoot and why do we ask for certain things and that kind
Hmm.
of thing. Our enrollment team talked about like where can faculty be part of the enrollment marketing process, all of this. Nice food. I think we even had like a DJ or something. Like it was super
Yeah,
fun.
make it fun.
But to kind of reintroduce, and then we started doing those regularly because there's new
Hmm.
employees come on board. I remember somebody came in and was like, well, that's not how the school I came from did it. Like, well, you don't work there anymore. You work
Hmm.
here, and this is how we do it. Um, and kind of make it fun and something where they're seeing the clear benefit of it.
Hmm.
And I really strongly recommend this, and I'd love to hear your take on it. We streamlined our intake form to like the bare minimum of what we needed because
Hmm.
I didn't want to hear people say, you have this 30 field form. When we're talking about enrollment and
Hmm.
request for information forms, we're like, remove the friction,
Yes.
collect the minimum that you need to start moving something forward. And we can always pick up the phone call and fill in any blanks after that. But don't make them have to get like their social security card, like get all this
Yeah.
paperwork to be able to submit a project for review.
I think that is the best way to get the information that you need, but audience facing, it doesn't look like this 30 question, 40 question form. On the back end, it is, but to them, it's not. I think that's where you get the information that you need that's relevant for what they've selected. Like, for example, if somebody is picking advertising, they need some type of digital asset, you won't have the question populate for what are the print quantities for this as an example. So that's how you can use conditional formatting in your intake forms, um, so that you get the information that you need, but it also doesn't present itself like this like massive undertaking and this huge friction for your campus partners.
We did that around photography and videography. Like, is there photo video needs for this project? Because we did have a separate intake form when it was just photography or videography requested. So they didn't have to go through all those other layers. That main form would feed the photography form if photo video was requested. We actually streamlined our form down to very limited questions, and we didn't actually allow them to tell us what end product they wanted because we wanted to be able to apply our expertise to that project. So we asked them what their goal was, and there was a field where they could enter some open comments, but we didn't want people to request a brochure. And then as we get into that project and we're designing the brochure, we're finding out they're sending it digitally, or we're finding out that what they actually need is a full-blown campaign that has PR involved, we're going to produce a promotional video for this. We wanted them to see us as the experts and to tell us, what are you trying to accomplish? And then in those meetings where we met twice a week, we could say, yeah, we see this project has these potential deliverables. Let's assign a team to this, and then have whoever is the leader of that group reach out and talk them through, this is what we're recommending. And then it's a give and take. They may still need a brochure, but we found that what was often happening is people were asking for things they didn't actually need, or that weren't going to help them achieve their goals, versus letting us use our marketing expertise to help them just determine what will help them meet their goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. And I would definitely co sign that for sure, to allow your team to be able to guide them in what they actually need, because there is that gap to the educational gap or marketing gap between like the requester and your team, the division, the marketing team. And so I think using the form in a way to get that higher level information to at least kickstart the project, I think is a great way to also use the intake form. I would still add some type of parameters from a back end standpoint. If this is feeding into a project management tool, there should be certain questions that can help trigger the tool to create the appropriate project and assign the appropriate team members based off of the request. As long as that is included too, just to create relief a lot of the friction that may happen in trying to assemble the right people,
Mhm.
and that time that's kind of spent doing more of that back end
That
work.
makes sense.
Hmm.
Our big first project with this approach was, our MBA program came to us with the ugliest brochure known to man that they had kind of done themselves in probably paint, and it didn't even use the school colors. It was terrible. Sorry, MBA people. I'm not going to say what institution, but they came to us saying, "Can you just reproduce this brochure?"
Mm.
And we have a few text edits to it, and we were like, "Well, what are you trying to do?" And they're like, "Well, we're supposed to grow enrollment by 20% this year," and we're like, "Okay, so what's your budget?" Or that was part of the form, was like, "What's your budget?" And we were like, why don't we do a small digital advertising campaign, do some PR things? We actually had a billboard that we just had year round. Why don't we throw it into that billboard? We'll create this brochure because you have plans to go to like graduate school fairs. We'll revamp your website. We're going to help you with planning webinars to help people who have questions, info sessions. And they were like, "Oh, okay, like, sure." Their, applications went up 50%. They had 26 people show up for an info session. They'd never had more than 3 show up for an info session before that. And suddenly all the other departments were like, "Hold up. Wait a second. All these years we've just been dusting off old brochures and asking you to make some text changes, and what you're saying to me is there's a bunch of things that we could be doing that will actually move the needle? How do I sign up for that?" And the resistance, those success stories helped that campus wide resistance shift as well. As we're kind of wrapping up this conversation, what is one mistake that you see people make quite frequently when they're redesigning workflows, or implementing a new system?
The biggest mistake is designing the workflow in a vacuum, right?
Mm,
So sometimes leaders and even consultants, they create this clean process map. It looks beautiful, but it doesn't really reflect the reality of how work actually moves
mm,
within the team or within the division. And then the team rejects it because it feels disconnected, right? For all the
mhm,
reasons that we talked about earlier. So you have to understand current state before you can design for future state. Where is work really coming from? Who is actually approving things? What informal steps are keeping the process alive? And then also, where are people creating workarounds? If you skip that discovery, then you risk building something that looks really organized, but will not be adopted. Future
mhm.
state only works when it is honest about current state.
Oh my gosh, that's the takeaway. I think
Yeah, right there.
that's the best line there. This has been so fantastic and helpful. I'm curious, what do you think is the very first thing that somebody should do if they're interested in undertaking this effort?
The very first thing someone should do is to pull 5 to 10 recent projects, like we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
Work with your current data, your current state, and then ask those key questions that we spoke about earlier as well. The key routing questions, like how are requests coming in? How are you getting information? What's slowing things down? What does the approval path currently look like? That's where I would start. Start with a good subset, like 5 to 10 projects.
I love that. Fantastic advice. Last question, and I ask all my guests this. What is your hottest higher ed take?
Hmm. My hottest take is that the most strategic Marcom teams are not always the ones with the best campaigns. They're really the ones that have the clearest operating rhythm
Mm.
behind the campaigns.
I love that. I could not agree more. A couple months ago, I recorded an episode with Shane Baglini talking about how small teams actually have to be incredibly nimble and incredibly process oriented. And I think that I often say, apologies to everybody who worked for me somewhere else, but at Winston-Salem State, we were able to be so innovative because we had process nailed down. No wasted effort, no chaos, everything being proactive so that the few actual fires could be dealt with, resources planned effectively. Nobody was like, you dumped 40 hours of work on me to do in 2 days. It was amazing. And that is 100% because this whole chaotic system was completely organized and we were in sync. Fantastic hot take. Where can people find you if they want to talk with you more about this?
Yeah, people can find me at itsallthingscontent.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn as Joanne Giles, where I talk about workflow clarity, higher ed operations, and building operating rhythms that help teams move from reactive to strategic. I also publish the workflow clarity newsletter on LinkedIn.
Nice. Awesome. And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. You can also find me on my website at Solve Higher Ed. And you can find my book at heartoverhypebook.com. And I love hearing from listeners, so please reach out if you have any questions or thoughts. And until then, let's go bust some silos. Listeners, can I ask you a quick favor? If you enjoy this show, take a moment to give it a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm a type A eldest daughter, so positive feedback is basically my love language. I also genuinely love hearing from listeners. You can find me at LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt. That's JaimeHunt. And yes, I am named after the Bionic Woman. You can also find me at solvehighered.com. Say hello, share a thought, pitch an idea. Don't be shy. I genuinely love hearing from you.